1976, the British astronomer Patrick Moore made an announcement on BBC Radio 2. He said, at 9:47 a.m. today, there will be a once-in-a-lifetime astronomical event occurring. He said, this is something that every listener can experience in your very own home. The planet Pluto is going to pass behind Jupiter, temporarily causing a gravitational alignment that would counteract and lessen the Earth's own gravity. Patrick Moore told his listeners that if they jumped in the air at the exact moment when this planetary alignment occurred, they would experience a strange floating sensation. When 9:47 a.m. arrived, Radio 2 began to receive hundreds of phone calls from listeners claiming to have felt this sensation. One woman even reported that she and her 11 friends had risen from their chairs and floated around the room. The date was April 1st. On April 1st, 1996, Taco Bell took out a full-page ad that appeared in 6 major newspapers announcing that it had bought the Liberty Bell and was renaming it the Taco Liberty Bell. Hundreds of outraged citizens called the National Historic Park in Philadelphia, where the bell was housed, to express their anger. Their nerves were only calmed when Taco Bell revealed a few hours later that it was all a practical joke. The best line of the day came when White House Press Secretary Mike McCurry was asked about the sale. Thinking on his feet, he responded that the Lincoln Memorial had also been sold. It would now be known as the Ford Lincoln Mercury Memorial. On April 1st, 1998, Burger King published a full-page advertisement in USA Today announcing the introduction of a new item to their menu, the left-handed Whopper, specially designed for the 32 million left-handed Americans. According to the advertisement, this new Whopper included all the same ingredients as the original Whopper, lettuce, tomato, hamburger patty, etc. But all the condiments were rotated 180 degrees for the benefit of their left-handed customers. The following day, Burger King issued a follow-up release revealing, of course, that although the left-handed Whopper was a hoax, thousands of customers had gone into restaurants to request the new sandwich. And simultaneously, according to the press release, many others came in requesting their own right-handed version. Now, we can have a good laugh at the temporary foolishness that can sometimes happen. We're coming up on April 1st, and companies all across the world are going to do some things like this. Now, the Bible has a lot to say about foolishness, but it defines it a little differently. And one who said a great deal about folly is Solomon. We're going to be in chapter 10 of Ecclesiastes today. But before we go there, we need to take a minute and define that word, folly or foolishness. We need to make sure we're understanding Solomon's intent here, because otherwise we could go off on weird tangents. Now, to do that, we can take a look at one of his other sets of wisdom writing, the book of Proverbs. Now, in one sense, the book of Proverbs is just that. It's a book that's full of little sayings that should be taken and studied each on their own. But in another sense, there are a few through lines that go through that entire book. For instance, there are a few main characters you will find in the book of Proverbs. We have wisdom, personified as a woman who calls for the wise and the canny to come to her to see what she has to offer. And her opposite, the wicked woman, who calls to those who would reject wisdom. But as you read through the book of Proverbs, you will notice there are 4 really main characters of the book. We have the wise, the simple, the lazy, or the sluggard, depending on what you read, and the fool. And through the book, we get introduced to all these characters. We get introduced to how they think, what they consider to be important, how they act. And most of the time, we learn how to avoid acting like them. And the way that Solomon really defines them is through the way that they deal with truth. Let me explain. The wise are those that when they find out some kind of valuable truth, they're willing to see the inherent value in it. And what that means is, if they see a need for personal change because of that truth, they're willing to do so. because they want a life that is consistently getting better. So the wise sees a need for change and is willing to change as long as it is wise to do so. A good example of that is Apollos in the New Testament, where Apollos was a great preacher. He was preaching the Gospel of John. And as he's out there preaching, these two other Christians come along, Priscilla and Aquila, and they say, you got almost everything, but let's teach you something a little better, teach it more fully to you. And Apollos, who could have been, well, I've been preaching for years now. What do you have to say to me? No, he stopped and listened to them. And when he found out he was teaching things incorrectly, he changed. On the other hand, you've got the lazy man. The lazy man is the one who meets that same truth, sees the value in the truth. They might acknowledge the wisdom in the truth, but they're not willing to commit themselves to action. The lazy man says, I would rather stay right where I'm at, even if it's wrong, because change means work. One of my favorite proverbs in the whole book is, the lazy man says there's a lion in the streets. Basically what that means is, he sits at home, he says, I could go out and get a job, but there's probably a lion out there somewhere who's waiting to get me, so I'm safer just sitting at home. Then there's the simple man. The simple man is the one who is willing to change, but he doesn't know what path to take. Simple here doesn't mean stupid. Simple means ignorant. He just doesn't know any better. And the simple man will change when a direction is given. But they're an empty slate when it comes to what truth really is. And it's one of the warnings in the book of Proverbs is make sure if you are a simple person, make sure you're going the right direction. Make sure you get good advice. And then we come to the fool. Solomon's definition of a fool is the one who will not change because he's already convinced he's right. He won't listen to evidence. He has no intention of giving truth the time of day, simply because he's absolutely sure he does not need any instruction. That's why it says, the fool has said there is no God. And you can't convince him otherwise, because he's not even going to listen to the facts that you bring forward. The fool is the one who will not change no matter what, because he's already convinced himself he's already got the truth. So we get proverbs like, the wisdom of the prudent is to discern his way, but the folly of fools is deceiving. Fools mock at the guilt offering. That would be the sacrifice. But the upright enjoy acceptance. Doing wrong is like a joke to a fool, but wisdom is a pleasure to a man of understanding. Folly is joy to the one that lacks sense, but a man of understanding walks straight ahead. So to boil that down, when we're talking in Solomon's language about a fool, the fool is the one who is so convinced of their own correctness that they're not going to even entertain the thought of something else. They are immature, and they are often impossible to have discourse with because they won't even engage with you. I once had a discussion with someone, an intelligent Christian, about a theological matter that they had taught to a class. Now, they were in the wrong. And to be honest, in any other situation, they would have agreed with me. They knew they were in the wrong in this. But even though I could point out verse after verse after verse of proof, they wouldn't listen because pride got in the way. And the conversation went nowhere. In that moment, they were acting like Solomon's definition of a fool. Now, I will say they changed later. Fools don't have to stay fools. But in that moment, there was this wall of pride that jumped up and said, no, I know what I'm talking about. I know exactly what I'm saying. You can't convince me otherwise. That's what brings us to Ecclesiastes 10. Now, we're in the back half of this book, and here Solomon has been giving us wise advice, mostly through Proverbs, about how to actively live in a life that is full of vanity. So we look at life, we say, nothing here is permanent, nothing here is going to last forever. If God isn't in it, then it's all useless. So last week we looked at living life with the things that are inevitable that we don't like. Specifically, we talked about the inevitability of government, especially bad government, and the certainty of death. And as he gave us advice on finding the joy, the enjoyment in a world like that, he points out the fact that even though we live in a world where you can't control certain things, you do get to control you. And you get to decide whether or not you're going to have joy. You decide whether you're going to enjoy the life that God has given you. Now today he's going to continue that same thought process with some proverbs about foolishness or a foolish attitude. And very specifically about the harm that a foolish attitude can have. And we're just going to pause briefly on each of these because this is a set of wisdom proverbs that just kind of touch on a wide variety of subjects, all about this idea of why it is very harmful to live life like you already know all the answers. So verse 1, chapter 10, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. Starting off good, right? Dead flies. Take the most beautiful perfume. Make it the sweetest smelling elixir. And if you put something rotten in it, suddenly it's not that desirable anymore. Your reputation is that elixir. Your reputation is that ointment. And that can be damaged by just a little bit of foolishness. Just a tiny little bit. It doesn't matter how good that reputation was up to that point. Remember that we live in a world that lives in vanity. And when you live in that type of world, the people are all too eager to let your failings outweigh your victories. So be careful of what you allow pride and sin to let show in your life. We have to be all the more careful of what and who we allow to influence us, because the picture of this is, it's not some foolish thing that you did in the secret. It's something that is shown to the public. The people see the dead flies in the ointment. We have to be all the more careful to know who is influencing us, who is the one that is teaching us. Because if they're teaching us and influencing us to act foolish, then our reputation is going to go down. Because, verses 2 and 3, a wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. This is not a political statement, right and left. So often the guidance that we get is going to lead us one way or another. And the decisions of life, in the forks in the road, a foolish guide is going to lead to places that you don't want to go. They're places that are wrong. Sometimes they're places that are unsafe. Definitely unsafe in the spiritual sense. And the foolish guide always leads down the unsafe road. Well, how do you know who to follow? How do you know if a guide is foolish? Well, you pay attention. The fool is so full of their own correctness, they have no problem letting themselves be known as a fool. So we don't do things from a rash perspective. If it's important, pay attention to the ones who are giving you advice. The fool will tell you by their own actions who they are. The picture that Solomon gives is the fool just lets everybody know, hey, everybody, I'm a fool. One great example of this is Solomon's own son, probably not long after he wrote these words. When Rehoboam took the throne, he sought advice for how he should rule. Now, his older, more experienced advisors, the ones who had lived through his father's reign, knew that the people were hurting. And they were hurting because of Solomon's laws. See, Solomon lived in a time that was completely peaceful. Solomon never went to war. And because of that, they kind of got into this rut of, well, now we're going to go and do all these building projects. We're going to do these things that are going to improve the country. It's really hard to improve a country without money. So Solomon enacted these tax laws that ended up kind of hurting the people. So these older advisors, they advised, now that we're here, back off on the taxes. You lower those taxes and the people will love you. They will serve you willingly. On the other side, there were the younger advisors, probably his buddies, the ones he'd grown up with. They said, double down on those taxes. You need money to run a kingdom, and by the way, you can get a little extra for yourself in all of that. Well, Rehoboam acted foolishly, listened to the wrong advice, and given time, the wisdom of the wise would have made itself known, but he acted recklessly. And because of that, the kingdom split in half and was never the same again. See, the wise person, in contrast, is calm, patient, allows for time to let the truth come out. Look at verse 4. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. Now see that the contrast there between the wise and the fool. The king is coming up against you because he thinks you have done something against him. How do you respond? Do you yell back at him? Or do you let the truth come out? Be calm. Let the truth be the truth. And so he gives a couple examples of the result of foolish rulers ruling in a foolish way. Remember, when Solomon is writing this, he's the ruler here. He's the government. So verses 5 through 7. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places. The rich sit in a low place. I've seen slaves on horses and princes walking the ground like slaves. Now he's going to touch on this again, but we get a picture of what happens when a foolish man gets to be in charge. Folly gets exalted. The wise are ignored. Those who have proven themselves and the policies that have worked in the past, they're left by the wayside as those who do not know how to rule try their own things. And remember that when Solomon is writing this, the rulers were put in place by God himself, and very specifically by God. So the ones that God has chosen to elevate get ignored in favor of those who are unworthy of the role. And again, we see this exact thing play out in this next generation of royalty. Rehoboam makes this stupid decision. It splits the kingdom in half. So now you've got the kingdom of Judah in the south and the kingdom of Israel in the north. And a man named Jeroboam was the one who led the rebellion. Jeroboam used to be a part of Solomon's armed forces. But now, because of how Solomon acted, because of the things he wanted Jeroboam to do, even though he was this great, mighty man, he had him out digging holes. Now he's going to step into the role of a king. And he's not prepared for that. God even tells him, you follow my lead, I'm going to give you this northern kingdom. I'm going to let you rule. You're going to have generations of kings after you as long as you stay on my side. But he's so paranoid that the people are going to recognize, well, Jerusalem, that's down in that southern kingdom. And that's where we've got to go to worship God. And maybe if they go down there to worship God, they're going to find out they like it down there and they're going to stay. So Jeroboam decides, well, I'm going to give them another option. So he builds golden calves for the people to worship instead of going back down to Jerusalem. And the nation falls to pieces in what seems like moments. And Jeroboam never gets a generation after him on the throne. More advice in verses 8 through 10. He who digs a pit will fall into it. A serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them. He who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. All of these things are jobs. They're how you act foolishly at work. And if you act with foolishness, you will get foolish rewards. Here he's using the example of work. If you work without wisdom, you're going to end up hurt. It's one of the reasons we have laws in this country like OSHA that dictates what we are allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. I don't think I've ever been in a job that fully followed what OSHA said. And the examples here are of people who work for a living, and they do so in a foolish manner. If you're digging a hole, you gotta be cautious. You might just fall in. If you're a demolition worker, be careful of what's in the walls. If you dig out stones, if you split logs, you are responsible for your own safety. Even in the little things, wisdom is better than folly. Take the time, sharpen your pick, sharpen your axe, and you'll use less energy. In other words, Solomon was the first one to advise, work smarter, not harder. And again, putting this in perspective for the times, if a man got hurt at work, there's no such thing as workers' compensation. Medical advances aren't anywhere near what they were today. If you dig out stones and one of them falls on you, you just kind of stay hurt. And maybe now you can't work at all, and you're forced to beg to get everything you need. Another thing to be careful of, 11 through 15. If the serpent bites before it's charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. The words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginnings of the words of his mouth is foolishness. The end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be. And who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. You know, we all have a serpent that we have to control. We talked about it in James, where he also called it a raging fire, our tongue. And if we keep it under control, if we use it with wisdom, it can cause very good outcomes. But if we lose control of it, if we destroy recklessly, then we're acting foolish. And the fool, because he's so convinced he already knows everything, does not know the danger of misusing his tongue. The one who speaks the most is not always the one who is wisest. In fact, it's usually the opposite. When the fool wants to convince you of how right they are, they just keep on talking. And the sad thing is, it often works. Just look at any news media today. They're going to claim to you that they are fair, that they allow for all parties in a situation to speak. But what actually happens? It always devolves to a bunch of grown adults yelling at each other like children and no actual information getting conveyed. Debates are no longer debates. They're shouting matches. You know, I was always taught that the one who wins the debate is the one who never had to raise their voice. The wise will simply state truth. And truth is powerful enough on its own to speak for itself. The fool explains, and then explains the explanation, and then explains how they came to that conclusion. And so often it ends up at some completely unrelated point because they have no wise direction. If you want a really good example of this, watch any political debate and count how many times somebody in the audience asks a question that never gets answered. It happens all the time. Continuing the advice, verses 16 through 19. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of the nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through sloth the roof sinks in, through indolence the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, wine gladdens life, money answers everything. This wisdom is all about the direct effect that wisdom or folly, depending on which direction you go, and especially the wisdom or folly of a leader, will have on a people and the impact one life can have on a whole nation. If you have a wise ruler, if he puts the priorities in the right places, if he follows the right advice, if he keeps the people's welfare first in life, then the people are going to be happy. They prosper. It's one of the main reasons we're told multiple times throughout the Bible to keep praying for our leaders. What they decide affects us. But the bad side of things happens when the leaders would rather look out for themselves, when they would ignore problems in favor of personal happiness. I like that line in there that basically says, you'll be happy when your king knows how to throw a party. There are times for revelry. There are times to have fun, but you have to know when those times are. Food is good. Money talks. But the guiding force behind both has to be wisdom, or the people are going to suffer. If the one who is in charge does not know how to lead, does not know when to party, then the people are going to suffer. And it's that line in there. It's through sloth, through laziness, that the roof sinks in. Because we ignore the problems that we see in favor of staying lazy. And when that happens on a political level, on a ruler level, on Solomon's level, the thing that's sinking in and is destroyed is usually the country. One final piece of advice, verse 20. Even in your thoughts, don't curse the king. Not in your bedroom, nor in your bedroom, curse the rich. For a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter. Be careful to show respect to those who have power over you, whether they deserve it or not. We talked about it last week, but we're instructed more than once to pray for our leaders and show them respect no matter who they are, because God is ultimately the one who put them in those positions of power. And if that's not enough, you never know who else is listening and who might have the ear of that ruler. Here we had a whole chapter of these little proverbs, advice for living, helping us to see the wisdom among the foolishness of life. And that's really one way of looking at the philosophy of Christianity. True wisdom is seeing life from a different perspective. Specifically, true wisdom is seeing life from a divine perspective. Seeing the wisdom of this world through the lens of God's eyes. Paul told the Corinthians, God has chosen the weak things of this world, the foolish things of this world, to shame the wise. Now, he didn't say we're all a bunch of fools. What he said is, the things that the world looks at and says, that's foolish, that's something to ignore. That's the world being a fool. We already know all the answers. Those are the things that God has chosen to really show what truth really is. And by the way, that's us. When we look at this world through the lens of God's eyes, we're going to see things differently. Now, yes, we all act like fools sometimes. And to be clear, not all folly is sinful, but all sin is folly. And we are all guilty of that. So how do we get wisdom to combat the foolishness? Well, we find it at the feet of one who is truly wise, if we are wise enough to listen. I have a couple of books that I found very fascinating that are talking about what a rabbi and a disciple was in the times of Jesus. And one of the blessings that people would give is, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi's feet. If you think about that, what that really means is, I hope you're so close to your rabbi that when he walks down the road, the dust that he kicks up gets all over you. That's what wisdom following Jesus is. It's following after him so close that we can't get any closer to him. Life in this world is really vanity. It really is. Nothing in this world is going to last forever. But seeking him, we find true wisdom. And we find it by looking at the foot of the cross, where our foolish sin was paid for, where the greatest king of all acted on our behalf, no matter what it cost him, to bring us to the wisdom that we need to lead us to eternal life. And we find that wisdom at Calvary. It's going to be our invitation hymn. It's this idea that whatever happens in life, whatever led up to that point, it was all made foolish by just standing at the feet of Jesus on the cross. You know, we all had to face that at one point. We all had to come to the conclusion, my sin put Jesus on that cross. And what we did with that decision kind of showed, am I wise or am I a fool? When we faced up to that fact, we also have to face up to the fact that there's nothing I can do about that. I can't change it. I can't take it back. I can't do enough good things to overshadow it. My sin put Jesus on the cross. And so my only two choices at that point are to say, oh, well, I guess I'll just live this life the way I want to and let it go. Or I can accept his offer. The offer that says, come to me. Whoever wants to can come. And to come, you just have to bring your faith. Your faith that will lead you to action. Belief and repentance, confession and baptism. Those things are the mix that God has put, those conditions that God has put on us to show this is the reason, this is showing me your faith. And when that happens, we really find out what wisdom truly is. Because we have a ruler that wants the best for us. And so he offers us that. But it all started one day when we met him at Calvary. Let's stand and sing.